Hello and welcome to Banking Transform, the top podcast in retail banking. I'm your host, Jim Marous, owner and CEO of the Digital Banking Report and co-publisher of the Financial Brand. In this episode of Banking Transform, we sit down with Scarlett Sieber, Chief Strategy and Growth Officer of Money20, to explore the remarkable journey of this unique fintech and financial services event. Since its inception in 2012, Money20 has grown from a startup conference to a global phenomenon, mirroring the rapid evolution of the bank industry itself. Scarlett shares insights on industry trends, the challenges facing traditional banks, and innovations shaping our financial future. Join us for this fascinating look at how Money20 has both witnessed and catalyzed the transformation of banking over the past decade. Money20 was founded in 2012 by payments and fintech veterans from Google, TSYS, and Citi. They broke the stereotypes of traditional business conferences and designed an experience built for banking by bankers. Actually, as a little side note, I was actually involved in some of the early stages of building for retail banks after the event had already started. It is certainly a massive undertaking that has reflected the changes that have occurred in the past decade in the financial services industry. So, Scarlett, we have known each other for more than a decade, I believe. And with both of us steeped in the events business, both as presenters and creators. I remember some times at Finovate and other events where we'd cross paths very quickly in most cases. You know, for most listeners who may not know you, can you share a little bit about your personal journey?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, Jim, as we were talking offline, it is crazy how long we have known each other and how not long it's been, or how long it's been since we've actually had some nice time together. So so if I were to give the shortest version, I would say I started my career as a tech entrepreneur, kind of tripped. I'm very tall, so I'm going to make a joke about tripping into banking because I was also a basketball player, and you and I both love sports. So I did kind of trip into banking where I had a data visualization platform that made it easy to digest large amounts of content. Anyways, long story short, was primarily a B2C platform, but also had a B2B offering. And one of the people who were utilizing our technology was BBVA. And so I got to know them. I became a finalist in their startup competition, Open Talent. And essentially the rest is history on that piece. So I have since then gone on to be CIO of a public bank out on the West Coast, did a bunch of other stints within banking, and was also a consultant doing the strategy and, innovation at scale with banks all over the world. But basically, I can say that I'm proud to have worked at some of the leading institutions who really are forefront of the industry when it comes to innovation, highest NPS. And I'm now at one of those, not at a bank, but one of those who is servicing the financial services industry here at Money20.
You know, it's interesting. Even though how long have you been at Money20, by the way?
So I've been in this role as Chief Strategy and Growth Officer since May of 2021, but Money20 was also my client back in 2019. So I ran the main stage for Vegas back in 19. So 3.5 years, but kind of like 5 years. It's a little bit of pause during COVID. Yeah.
So, how has the focus of Money20 evolved since its inception in 2012? And what does this tell us about the changing priorities in the banking industry?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'd say the focus has always been about community and having a place where the collective industry comes together to solve real problems. You gave a lovely introduction back to the start and inception back in 2012, not so long after a financial crisis. We now look here and we're sitting in 2024. We've had our own versions of that and all of the chaos and things that were happening, maybe a stabilization potentially, or a righting of the wrong, what was happening last year. So with Money20, our focus is still the same, which is about bringing the collective ecosystem together to learn and grow from each other. We like to talk about what happens on our stages, sets the pace for where the industry goes, but then also for people to meet and get business done. Because as you know better than most, this industry is extremely complex, and it's typically not one or two companies. There might be 6, 7, 8 people that need to get involved to make things happen, and they are all there at Money 2020, which is pretty special.
It's interesting. If I was to take somebody in the industry off the street and say, give me one word that describes Money 2020, whether or not you've been there or not, I think the one word that almost everybody would pick would be big. I mean, there's no doubt from the very beginning, there was a secret sauce to getting a lot of people together. We're talking about over 10,000 people. And I remember the days when you had people doing aerial things in the lobby. I remember the days when you couldn't even get by because the number of people that actually showed up to the event was almost too big to handle. And it really limits, in some cases, where you can do these. And now across the globe, you have so many events that are so large and bring so many people together. But what's interesting is during all this and all the hubbub, it's interesting how many significant technological advancements have been introduced or showcased at Money 2020. What do you remember over the past few years that is really, you go, wow, that's gonna make it, or geez, can't believe we got them. It is the biggest thing in the industry right now.
It's like you asking me which one of my kids is my favorite. They all are. No, but I would say a few things that kind of stick out. So I'll speak about myself as an attendee before I was here. I remember back in 2015 when I was at BBVA 2015, and I was like the head person for BBVA who brought the 30 or 40 of us together, put together our notes, and went and presented it to Carlos Torres, who was the CEO at the time, still chairman. But in any case, what I remember about that, because obviously we were interested in what our competitors were doing, what other people were doing, that Bank of America came and introduced Erica. If you remember that, Jim. So that was like their first AI chatbot. Here's Erica. So I remember that moment very well because I wrote about it. We've had, what I love is when you think about the next thing in financial services, you think about Money 2020. So of course, there are the big bank examples. MasterCard has come and made a lot of really interesting announcements. But then people who want to get into financial services, Uber. So Uber Money introduced at Money 2020. That happened in 2019. You have Apple coming and talking about the identity and biometrics, things that they added into Apple Pay. So all of that happened on our stages. So that, I think that's what's nice, back to the original part, is like it is the whole ecosystem. So you got the banks, you got the fintechs. If we go back to 2015, there was a little startup by the name of Stripe where Patrick Collison was on stage with Vinod Khosla talking about the future of payments. And, we're now almost a decade later. Stripe is one of our big partners. We have a lot of great conversations with them. And that's true globally as well. AirWallex was an early startup with us, and they now have over 100,000 customers and are valued at, $5 billion plus. So many, many examples, but there's a lot. I mean, each one is special for different reasons. And I will say that there's going to be some quite exciting announcements coming up this year as well. So we'll see what happens.
It is the place, kind of like the Consumer Electronics Show, where financial companies, if they can, try to schedule their announcements as part of your event, which is really what makes it one of the many reasons why it's so different. What is also interesting, and I went to your event in Amsterdam, not this past year, but the year previous to that, is I think I'm kind of linked into what's going on in the industry, but I was above the floor. I was in a room sponsored by IBM, and I'm looking over the floor, and I'm looking at all these booths. And there were very, very few organizations that I even recognized. So I think what's interesting is there's a lot of companies that are, number one, entrants into the marketplace that want to get their exposure there. Number two, some are looking for financing at the same time. Number three, it really shows, especially in Europe, how fast the change is happening and how we get kind of insulated in the United States as to what's hot, what's not, and what's going on in the marketplace. I think one thing that made me very aware, because I went to Vegas the same year, was a completely different category and group of involved companies on the floor, the showcase people. But from your perspective, how have the participants, the people showing their wares, changed, and how have the people that attend changed?
Really good question. Well, first of all, I love how you just like casually put in there that you were sitting up in like our premium balcony suites with some of the bigger companies, and there's a lot of good names up there. So just on your comment, I think it's really interesting. So a few things. Each show is reflective of that specific geography. So we have three primary shows, right? The Vegas one, which we've been spending most of our time talking about,
Yep.
the Europe one, and then the Asia one, which we just launched in Bangkok this year. We had done it in a different city in previous years, but we came back within our inaugural launch in Bangkok this year. And each of our shows has there's a few things that are similar. So in terms of the composition of the attendees, doesn't matter if you're at 10,000 plus or 3,000 like we had in Asia. The composition is quite similar in terms of seniority. So roughly 34-35% C-suite, regardless of where you are. The startups are around a quarter, 25%. Now that does adjust depending on the year and depending on the location a bit. So not surprisingly, there's a lot of money. All of a sudden, there's a lot more startups, or sometimes we've seen, in fact, the opposite, where we'll get a lot more early stage stuff. So anyways, that's a really interesting point. I would say from Europe, what you said is actually a very spot on for a few reasons. So even myself this year, and I walk that showroom floor probably more than most people, 20, 30,000 steps a day. Tried to wear tennis shoes at all times if I can, except for on stage. But there was like one of the things that's really interesting about Europe is we have a lot of country pavilions. So there was like a space that was like all Turkish everything, all Latvia, all Estonia, it was awesome to see. And there was companies that I haven't heard of. And I feel like I'm quite well versed in what's happening in the world of fintech. But even I was like, who is this company? What do you do? So it's definitely true. So it's really exciting. But like I said, in terms of the composition of the attendees, it does shift based off of what's going on in the industry. So if you think back to like 2021, if you look at our Vegas show again, we had more of a representation both on our delegates and sponsors from crypto companies. Why? There was a lot of money in crypto at that time. Was that the same in 2022? No, it was not, but that was picked up by whatever else was next. So insurance will come, regulation will come, things like that. So we're a mirror of what's going on in the industry, but the thing that's really interesting is the seniority, and that piece stays quite consistent regardless of all the other things around it.
You know, it is interesting. And as you said, the event itself, while right on the surface, it feels like the same. It's big. I mean, I see both Vegas and Amsterdam, very big. Asia is relatively new. But you look at it and you go, there's just a lot going on here. And you try to pick up as much as you can. But you use the entire space and you take for granted the people you meet there. And that's the dynamic, the interaction with people, the seeing people you know. Hey, we're going to be there. We're always there. Things of this nature. And even though the faces may change over time, as you said, the level of seniority is still there. And what's interesting too is you evolve based on what the marketplace is looking for. I was very impressed with the way you shifted and had what I would call the one-on-one moments. And when I was in the Amsterdam event, I remember that after the first day, you greatly increased the number of tables out there that people could sit at and have the one-on-one meetings, which are basically set up on a reservation basis and a very limited time. I think it was 8 minutes, 12 minutes. I mean, a very short amount of time. But it's very active. It's like speed dating. And it was very interesting to see the activity that went on, to see the discussions that went on. And it sometimes just gave you a chance to meet face-to-face with a human and say, before you leave, I want to at least let you know who I am. Share business cards in a real-time, face-to-face basis. What other things are you looking at from the standpoint of activities and things that people can do? Because, you know, you used to be very much on the presentation, the stages and things of that nature, but a whole lot more is going on now that's different than it was before.
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you for saying that. It was interesting because as you were talking, I don't think I might have said this maybe once publicly ever, but maybe not. So talking about meeting people that can, surprise you. So back to 2019 when I was contracting, it was my first Money 2020 Europe show. our friend Dave Birch introduced me to Sophie Jabot then, and she and I ended up co-authoring a book together. And that was one of those things where there
Yeah.
wasn't like a specific intention of you should meet this person for you guys to go do this. It was, hey, you both have a lot of similarities. At that time, neither of us had kids, by the way. It was just like, hey, you guys, two women doing some really great things. You have a lot in common. We stayed in touch, ended up co-authoring a book. So to your point though, I'm not a great sleeper. Sleep is very important to me, but the things that keep me up at night and what I wake up every morning thinking about is people. It's an investment to be part of us, right? It's an investment, the flight, the hotel. I think it's worth it because you can get a lot done in that amount of time, the ticket, everything like that. It is an investment. So I wake up every morning thinking about making sure that everyone who comes to our show and experiences our brand has the most impactful ROI as possible. So as you said, there's ways that we do that. So even for Vegas this year, you have the connections odds, which is the example that you were giving, where you can look through our entire attendee list, pick who you want. They connect. They obviously have to say it's reciprocal because that's how things happen. You can get things done during the day. We have sessions, content sessions, where people come together over similar experiences. So one of our stages is off the record. No media is allowed because we want to have like that real genuine connection, and people there get to be part of like a moment that no one else saw. And those are the special things, right? Again, you and I both love sports. You're at the Super Bowl, you saw that play, and all of a sudden you just connect with that person next to you for the rest of your life because you experienced that together.
Yeah.
So we do that from a content perspective. We also invest a lot in the activations and things we do at night. So also, humans are humans. Like, yes, we're about getting business done, but we both might like this type of food or whatever else, and then all of a sudden we feel like we have another level of connection. So this year for Vegas, we have all of that. Plus, we do have a dedicated curated meeting program on Sunday that we actually just announced yesterday. And so that was what I was doing for most of the month of August, being a support system for the team on that one. But where we are looking at, okay, the way that people do business is shifting. How can we, again, go back to giving as much ROI as possible? So before the show floor even opens on Monday morning, we'll have this curated, dedicated meeting program on Sunday. So wherever we can, however we can, whether it be, we've had really crazy cool things in the past where you could be racing top drone together. And, there's a business thing there in Europe this year. You weren't there this year, Jim, but one of the things we did, we have these like beautiful merch coins. Anyways, long story short, they're quite rare. And the way that you get them in Europe was two people had to come together. I had to tell you something about, so Jim's son plays lacrosse, da 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 da. You had to tell them something about my kids. And then all of a sudden, it doesn't have to be about kids. It's just a good example because we know each other on social as well. But ignoring that, all of a sudden you do that, then the coin comes. So it is really about fostering that business and connection in a human way. And then I think that's the part that a lot of people miss is the human element of it.
Well, and you referenced it. It's not just the show floor. Amsterdam, the time when I probably got to know the most unique people in the most unique way was when you take over an entire street in Amsterdam for a party, and you own the street. Everybody's there. It's crowded. It's wall to wall people. But you see people and you see the Dave Birch or the Chris Skinner of the world, and then they introduce you to others, and it's crazy the interactions that take place. But what's interesting too is just what we're talking about has changed. There's certainly the Gen AI stuff and everything else, but even the relationship between traditional banks and fintech companies has evolved from competition to collaboration more than ever. How has this shift been reflected in the discussions and what goes on at Money 2020, where at one point it was, we're going against each other, but now in many cases you have fintech companies trying to be bought by traditional banks, maybe partner with traditional banks, or maybe go the other way and be buying a traditional bank?
Yeah, it's a question as old as time, right? And I was thinking we were talking back to the financial brand back in 2018, and I think we were having this exact chat, like collaboration versus is competition. So what has been so interesting and I would say refreshing is it feels like in the last decade, the fact that we can still have this exact conversation a decade later is a bit frustrating, but also really refreshing because there has been a lot of change. So one of our key, we call them stories because I have a team of content experts who's very intentional about the words that we use, but basically themes for this year is about fintech growing up. And it really has moved on from, there is still competition. Don't get me wrong. We are, the US in general, it's a capitalist economy. Like the competition is good. It's healthy. It pushes you to be better. But the collaboration piece is now more than ever true. And we're seeing so many examples of that coming to life, where, again, it could be a fintech with a bank, but then even collaboration bringing in the regulator. So in Asia, we had a closed door regulator session with a bunch of the big regulators over in Asia. And we had conversations with them and the banks, them and the fintech. So like the way that this industry collectively moves forward is by collaboration. And so, yes, we're seeing more and more of that where, and especially I know some of your background and mine, like we've sat in how many boardrooms, especially for some of the smaller institutions, where it was very much competition, either like we don't know what's going on or it doesn't impact us or this is too much, to now being really receptive and open to it, which I think is really exciting. So we've seen some nice uptick in some of the smaller financial institutions who didn't have the crazy big budgets, who couldn't go and make all these investments to go and build this stuff themselves, now getting more excited and open to the idea of what the possibilities are. Obviously still a bit cautious because we've seen some not good things happen, and not everything, the way that progress happens, some things end up falling through the cracks and not everyone is like the best of actors. But in general, there's a lot more optimism and positivity around the ability to work with these other companies who have strengths and assets that they don't. And so to me, it's like the best of both worlds. What do you have? What do we have? What's your like key value add? What's our key value add? How do we work together to make something crazy, beautiful happen? And that's what we're looking at. And as you said, lots of acquisitions still.
Well, it's interesting because you talk about value add, you talk about ROI, you talk about the fact that these events are not cheap for the players or for the organizers. And one thing that we've seen in the last couple of years is the fact that there's been a paring down of events. And everyone has to find their niche. We already know there's an event out there that focuses almost entirely on the meetup, and obviously probably drove some of the changes that happened at Money20. Financial Brand Forum, the event that I'm certainly the closest to, is very unique in that it really focuses pretty much on the retail banking sector, marketing, product development, innovation, things of this nature, a subset of what Money20 does. But again, it's fairly large. But at the same time, many organizations, many events from the past have either fallen by the wayside or pared back significantly what they're doing. As an organizer of Money 2020 and always having to stay aware of what's going on, what keeps you up at night from the standpoint of making sure that Money 2020 doesn't become a fatality, even though it has the numbers? You can still become irrelevant even with large numbers, as we've seen in the past.
Yeah, I would say a few things. So it's actually a perfect tie into the question you asked before, because the good thing about competition is it always makes you a better version of yourself. I am, and anyone on my team knows this, I am a self-improvement like junkie for myself and for us. So I always see our biggest competition as ourselves, but clearly being aware of what else is going on around us. So I think there's a few things. It's going back to the crystal clear things of what is our unique value proposition and what do we bring to the table. And we have to use the word big, but I'm going to use it a different way maybe than you're thinking. We have the largest global platform of fintech. And so how do we make sure that we foster that and use that to our advantage? So the composition of each of our shows is roughly, so for the US and Europe, it's roughly 80% in region, 20% rest of the world.
Yep.
And then for Asia, it's slightly shifted to 70-30. That composition is really important to us because then also the other thing that we have 3 shows. How do we make sure we don't cannibalize ourselves and that each show is relevant for that specific geography? So that's the type of stuff that we do. So I'd say a few things. We really focus on making sure that the quality and caliber of our product, part of which is content, is the best that it can possibly be. We're highlighting new voices, interesting voices. The stuff on the big stages is the stuff that gets a lot of the attention because of the caliber and profile of the speakers, which is very important. But it's the other 80% of the content which still very important, special speakers having the real depth of conversation. That is the stuff that I think continues to drive us forward in the industry. And the other part is around allowing our customers, whether they be a delegate who's buying a single ticket or a sponsor who's investing a more significant amount of money with us, that we can help them accelerate their business. And we do that in many, many ways, and we quantify that. So however we can do that faster, better, more, it's not just about being, efficient, but it's about effective. So you can have X amount of meetings or whatever else, but are they with the right people? Is it actually moving your pipeline forward? And that's what I think about every single day, and making it as good as possible.
And it's interesting because I'm going to call it sub-content, but one of the things I've seen at the event in Amsterdam and the one I went to in Vegas is we're seeing new layers of content being created. For instance, my representation at Amsterdam was I was doing podcast interviews of representatives of the company I was representing, executives of those companies, because they were all going to be there, as well as with their clients. And we weren't the only place that was doing podcasts within the booth area. There's dozens, and that's something relatively new. But again, it gets back to the fact that because you have so many high-level representatives, it may be the most efficient way to get content created in an environment where the access to representatives, to insights, to leaders is unprecedented. And that plays well to what's happened at your event, what's certainly happened at our event at Financial Brand Forum. But it's interesting because there are so many layers of involvement in content because of the size of Money20, but also the environment you create for thinking and for sharing, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you saying that. It's true.
So Scarlett, before we broke, we talked a little bit about how different levels of engagement, content creation, and collaboration happen at events like Money20. One thing I've also seen over the last few years is a greater specialization of the industry and the way that it serves others. So the solution providers have gotten much more fine-tuned on what they're going to be best at. And they don't try to grab for the entire pie. You can get in an elevator speech and hear a differentiation between company A and B. How have you seen it happen within Money20? And maybe in some ways, the reason why I see so many companies I may not recognize is it's not the FISs and Visas as much as it is the ABC fintech or the DEE is fintech. So what do you see there from the standpoint of really micro specialization and excellence?
So yes, I think it's another great question. Micro specialization has definitely been on the rise. So I'd say the first place that we see that is during our call for content process. So we get thousands of submissions, and that, of course, is free to apply to. You don't need to be a sponsor. You can just submit. So anyone can submit, because we want to make sure that we have the highest caliber and quality of ideas, and obviously people who are submitting those ideas. And so what's interesting on that side is that at the surface level, there are a lot of companies kind of submitting the same thing. So then our job is to go to what you just talked about, which is what is it about you, company Z versus company Y, that makes you the right one to tell this story? Do you have a really interesting partner? Do you have a specific data point? Are you addressing the problem in a different way? That's where we spend a lot of time. And so you talked about the composition of the Europe show. The same is actually true through all of them, where you do have the Visas, the FISs, all of the big institutions there, and they still have a lot that they're trying to contribute, whether it be new product launches or getting more exposure to things that they've been having for a long time, but people don't really recognize them. They think about them as the traditional bank versus a big payments player, as an example. Not those ones we talked about, but some of our other financial institution partners. So they're really thinking about new ways to showcase what they're doing, but it's the same thing that the startups are doing. And so at times we try to help facilitate them, because sometimes they actually are competing, and that's okay. So they can utilize their presence on site to say what makes them unique unique, what makes them special. And other times they actually aren't competing. They're both looking at KYC, but from a totally different angle. And we can actually facilitate an introduction. They may or may not know each other, especially when you talk about the global nature of our show. Hey, here's a company over in Brazil who's thinking about it this way. They have really strong penetration here. Let's talk to them who's looking at it over in the UK as an example. So we do a lot of that to try to help facilitate, conversations. And one of the things is, and we're quite adamant about this, when you think about the content, like as an example, AI, you're going to see it throughout the entire show, but we will also have a dedicated track to AI. And in this case, we're doing that in partnership with NVIDIA, but that one will be specifically looking at many different applications of it. Again, open banking, it'll be sprinkled throughout the whole show. But on Sunday specifically, we're going to have open banking 101, 201, 301. So so in that example, we won't have one company. We might have two companies who think of themselves as competitors, and they probably are on the stage together talking about what they're doing. So it's not a one lens, but here is the collective of open banking. So, and that, like I said, the reason of 1, 2, and 3, back to what we were talking about earlier, is some people may be novices and they truly need to be educated on the basics, and other ones are experts and those people shouldn't be sitting in the same room hearing the same thing sometimes. So we want to make sure we give the right content for the right people.
Okay, so speaking of content, your event is obviously an ocean of content going on the days and the weeks that you're doing the events. You have select events throughout the year in different parts of the world.
Yeah.
How do you work to keep the content coming the other months of the year? How do you make it so that Money 2020 is top of mind in your key target audience's mind on the months that you don't have an event?
So a few things. So we've had a podcast, The Money Pot, for over 5 years now, or right around the 5-year mark, which, when you think about some of the earlier fintech podcasts, probably not one of the earliest, but for events, definitely we were an earlier day of that. So we do that all the time. Our team is out there as well, because one of the things that's unique about our content team is all of them except for one actually comes directly from the industry as operators, analysts, VCs, you name it. So they're out there in the ecosystem, spending time with the ecosystem. So we will release white papers. We obviously do a lot of social posting, but it is a very obvious thing that we think about, and there's more to come on that in the next few weeks, because we see that as a real area of opportunity. Quite frankly, our customers are asking for more of it, but we do some things, the things that I talked about, but we have a lot more that we can do and we will be doing in short order.
A lot of moving parts. One thing is interesting, and I know that for me, it's something that happens without even knowing it, is because you're so involved in the event, because you're so involved in the industry, you get an interesting perspective from a 30,000-foot view of what's going on almost before the marketplace itself knows that. From your perspective, Scarlett, what do you see as the biggest challenges facing the banking industry in the next 1 to 2 years?
That's a really good question. And we do see things ahead of time. And I think let me give you the way of where I'm getting to my answer. I talked about the call for content, which gives us a lot of information because it tells us what the collective is. Yep. And the call for content is quite different depending on the shows. I then also get the opportunity to sit alongside very senior people from some of the largest financial institutions in the world, talking about the problems that they're trying to solve and see how we can obviously help facilitate solutions for those problems. But I would say, if I were to think about some of the biggest things facing banking in the next 1 or 2 years, there's still a lot with, the macro economy. What's going on? Are we in a recession? Are we not? How are we going to get out of this? Is top of mind. What worries me about that is making sure that there's continuous investment in technology and innovation. And then the other part, I'd say, especially in the next 1 or 2 years. Now, this is with the biased answer, so I will give you a caveat. I was sitting at Cannes, which is our sister brand, listening to Elon Musk. So I'll give you a little bit of a caveat there. But I do think the importance of AI for us every single day is going to change fundamentally in the next few years. And then to your point on the banking questions, how are banks, not just AI, but how are banks integrating technology, and how can they start doing it in a more fast way that's obviously still compliant and all of that stuff? I'd say that's probably the biggest thing. Is the world is moving pretty quickly. What are banks doing to keep up? And then the other side of that, which is not what you asked, but another really important part, is around the regulatory environment next to that, and how are these pieces working together to make sure that we're protecting consumers, whether they be individuals like you and me or businesses. So how are we protecting the end customer, but moving forward at the pace that the world is moving forward? That's where I see is the biggest issue in the next 1 to 2 years.
You brought up my next issue, which is really, how does Money 2020 address things like regulatory challenges, cyber threats, economic uncertainties, the compliance issues? Because it's not just about the flash and dash, the next best thing, the shiny object down the road. Yeah. You really talk about the hard issues that may not draw the biggest crowds, but probably are on everybody's mind every day.
Yes. So I smiled when you said that, because when I was contracting with Money 2020, I mean, you always want to do a good job, but especially when you're contracting and this is your client. I spent a lot of time talking to the industry about what they wanted. So this was back, 5 years ago, and they wanted the regulators. So we got the OCC, we got the OCC, the FDIC, and the CFPB director, chairman, commissioner, right? All there, put them on a big stage. And some of them especially were super engaging, but the crowd was not packed, let's say, to your point. So what we have seen, though, is there's more of a desire for that now. So since then, the CFPB director, Chopra, came to Money 2020 back in 22 and first announced the CFPB's intentions around 1033. So I guess the long story short is we've been bringing more and more of that in. And as you know, this is literally politics in definition. So these relationships take a long time to build. But Michael Sue was there last year. We had Hester Pierce there last year. Randy Quarles, the former vice chairman of the Federal Reserve. So we really invest time and energy into bringing those people there, because, as you say, if they're not necessarily going to have the whole world sitting there watching. But what we have seen in the last 5 years is more of the whole world is actually sitting there watching, because I think to these original questions we've been talking about, collaboration, competition, regulation is very important in this whole thing working. And so their role is more important than ever. And technology is moving fast, and they need to be active participants in it. So we're trying to help facilitate that by bringing them there. So behind some of these closed doors, these things can happen, and we can start making real progress in a way, hopefully, that is a bit faster than it has been in the past.
So finally, looking ahead and without divulging any big secrets, but maybe divulging a few big secrets, that'd be kind of nice too. How do you make an event like Money 2020 better? What are the gaps that you say, geez, you know what? We've got to make this part of this event better, more accessible. And you've already talked about the expansion of content over time, the ability to make it so that Money 2020, while it's not a live event every month of the year, becomes alive every month of the year. It's a challenge that we have at Financial Brand Forum. How do you make it so that it's relevant on the months that you're not doing the event? What is on your mind about, geez, you know what? This is where we're trying to go.
Yeah. So I'm not going to start with content but I do have another answer for that. I would say, if I'm reflecting on the feedback that you've given during this interview, which is the word that you used, which was big, I would say that, exactly that. So as we continue to scale, because we are a public company, the way that we grow is by scaling.
Yep.
How do we make sure that, and we as I mentioned, we've already seen, as we've scaled from a couple thousand to 10,000 plus, that the composition of the seniority is the same. But for me, if I think about that next startup founder, if I think about that CEO of a credit union who's never been before, or a community bank or whatever else, making the show feel accessible and attainable, and that I get the ROI back for me, because how do I use that scale to my advantage? That's what's next for us, is getting all of the benefits of the big and the collective ecosystem, but also making it feel small and personalized and there for you. Like, I want Jim to show up and think that this entire show was made for Jim. That's what I want to do. So how is the combination of human and tech to make that happen, that's what we're looking at.
That is a great answer. And it prompted a thought. Sometimes when people are talking, it's not like I'm not listening, but I combine it to something real world. And I'm in Ohio. I'm in Cleveland. We have one of the biggest universities in the world located in Ohio, Ohio State University. Their biggest challenge was, how do we make this school as big as it is, but make it so it's small for the person that wants to be in liberal arts, the person that wants to be in business, the person that wants to be in engineering. And what I tell people, and they've done a really good job of this, is they make it extraordinarily manageable when you don't take the entire context of what it is. So again, you've done it in a lot of different ways, but how do you make it so that when I go to Money 2020, if my focus is all about payments or security or identity, there's a spot, there's a way for me to easily manage the space to be able to do that. Now, that's really difficult because all these elements overlap in a way that you go, geez, yes, this guy's interested in security and identity, but he also wants to know the new products. And you go, wow, that just blew up the whole thing. But maybe it's the product set, maybe it's something else. But it's interesting because that's the dynamic I tell people about Money 2020. You have to plan to attend to make sure you make the most of your time and your space and your footsteps. I'm the person who's going to walk the entire floor and keep on opening new doors going, oh my God, I didn't know this was here. That's what happened in Amsterdam. It was the last day I go, I didn't even know this part existed. And I go, note to myself, you got to plan, because it's not a space I was used to compared to, your space in Las Vegas where I kind of know where to look without knowing what I'm going to see there. But that's an extraordinarily good answer, Scarlett, because I think that is the big question, is how do you make it so that it's big, but it's small? And that's a puzzle, and where you get the right speakers for each one of these. Scarlett, it is really great to talk to you. I laugh because I was thinking about it. One of our early conversations about an event, and it wasn't either one of our events, was, oh my God, they're not used to having women on stage. They cannot use that kind of chair. And I remember I remember where we were when we said it. We were on the right hand. We were stage right. If you're looking at the stage, we were on an elevated area, and it was so funny because it was, oh my gosh, this event is not used to dealing with women speakers, and the women aren't used to being on a stage where all they have is a tall boy chair, and you go, this just doesn't work. So It's great to be together. And I also will say that my biggest event I've ever spoken at was Money 2020. And my guest at that main stage event was Derek White, who's become a very good friend. He was, I believe, at BBVA at that time when I interviewed with him. And we talk about the fact that we had two guests on that stage. And sometimes it doesn't always work out the best way, but we had one guest that really didn't want to emote. And Derek is the exact opposite. He pretty much jumps off the stage. And we went from having a really nice, everybody takes their turn, to it's going to be Derek and I talking to each other. And we survived. It was 7,000 people in the room at that time. And it was a lot of fun. I think we were right before Branson was on stage, so we had a good lead in. So
no, the moderator's job is the most unappreciated job in any event, any content thing. So what you just sort of talked about, it's so true. It's so hard to do right, and when you have a good moderator, it makes or breaks everything.
Well, it's fun because I learned, and that event is one I speak to all the time, the fact that you learn very quickly how to pivot for the entertainment value and not for the content. Because at the end of the day, the content takes a subservient position to entertain, because if they're not entertained, they're not going to hear the content. If they are entertained, they'll take in everything that's said. And I'll speak to Derek's capability of bringing an audience together every time. And you know him well to know that, he's your ultimate speaker, because he'll always get the audience involved, even if they don't want to be. So again, thank you, Scarlett. I appreciate it so much.
Thank you, Jim.
Thanks for listening to Banking Transformed, the winner of 3 international awards for podcast excellence. If you enjoyed what we're doing, please be sure to give Banking Transformed a positive review. Finally, Be sure to catch my recent articles on the financial brand and check out the amazing research we're doing for the Digital Banking Report. This has been a production of Evergreen Podcast. A special thank you to our senior producer, Leah Haslage, audio engineer, Chris Fafalias, and video producer, Will Pritz. I'm your host, Jim Marous. Until next time, remember, one of the keys to advanced education in banking has to do with attending major events and expanding your existing paradigms and building new relationships.